Home heating oil, the House call on the government to extend that pause to all forms of heating, home heating. The honourable leader of the official opposition.
I'll be splitting with the member for Peterborough-Kawartha. A Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. Those were the words of the Prime Minister, and that is the principle of my motion today. It reads, and I quote, that given that the government has announced a, quote, temporary 3-year pause, end quote, to the federal carbon tax on home heating oil, the House call on the government to extend that pause to all forms of home heating. Very simple. And how do you argue with it? If the Prime Minister has now caved on the carbon tax for those heating with oil, then he ought to be intellectually consistent and do it for all forms of heating, for all Canadians. Now, we know that the Prime Minister has decided to create 2 classes of citizens. He is under pressure and under duress decided to pause the carbon tax on home heat until after the election, at which point he intends to quadruple it. But in the meantime, there will be this temporary carve-out. Asked why there was a double standard and why this carve-out applied only to about 3% of households, the Minister of Rural Affairs said that other Canadians could have had the break too, but they didn't elect enough Liberals. Wow. In addition to that being a bloody-minded divide and conquer approach to politics, it's actually inaccurate because many did elect Liberal MPs and are still forced to pay the tax on the heat. These are people in Liberal-held ridings who will be excluded and will be forced to pay the higher tax on the heat as the temperatures goes down and the heat and the snow starts to fall. Are these citizens less Canadian than those that are getting the pause? Is the malnourished senior in the Liberal riding of Sudbury who heats with gas any less Canadian than those who get the pause? Is the single mom in the Liberal ridings of Thunder Bay any less Canadian as she is forced by the Prime Minister's tax to skip meals so her kids don't have to? Is the welder in North Bay any less Canadian as he cannot gas up his truck to go visit his dying relatives in other parts of the province any less Canadian? Of course not. But the Prime Minister thinks they are. And once again, we see his divide to distract strategy. You see, he thinks that if you are afraid of your fellow Canadian, you might forget that you can't afford to gas your car or heat your home. We have seen this divide and conquer strategy of the Prime Minister over many years. We saw how he called small businesses tax cheats. Wow. We saw how he called anyone who disagreed with him a small fringe minority, even though he later had to apologize for those comments. We saw recently how he tried to besmirch Muslim, Sikh, and Christian parents, calling them hateful simply because they wanted to protect their children. We see again and again how the Prime Minister tries to demonize hunters, calling them American, saying that people who live in Cape Breton and hunt or live in northern Canada and hunt for sustenance are the reason we have record gang shootings in downtown Toronto. That has become his go-to approach, and here we have it again, with a 2 classes of citizens approach to his carbon tax. Now, let's not forget that his plan is to quadruple the carbon tax if he's re-elected. My plan is the opposite. So I've proposed with this motion a compromise in the meantime. What I propose is that we take the tax off so Canadians can keep the heat on this winter. And then when Canadians go to the polls, we can have a carbon tax election where people choose between his plan to quadruple the tax on gas, heat, and groceries, and my common sense plan to axe the tax and bring home lower prices. Now, the Prime Minister, in his desperate divide and by the way, it's not just divide. Yesterday, he wouldn't even show up and defend this approach in the House. He was in Ottawa. He was in the building, and he would not answer questions.
You have a point of order from the Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
The leader of the Conservative Party has been told on many occasions he cannot do indirectly what he cannot do directly what he cannot do directly. So something of that nature. You know what I mean, Mr. Speaker. And I would ask that the member recognize that members of all sides of the House at times cannot be in the House for a multitude of different reasons.
I will caution the Honourable Leader about that. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
The Prime Minister's strategy is hide and divide. Hide and divide. Hide from debate, divide the population. That's how he thinks he will cling on to power, but here's the problem. He can run away from debating me all he wants. The problem is he can't run away from his own party. His former Environment Minister, Catherine McKenna, said that he had broken her heart. He'd broken her heart. His a Liberal Senator, Paula Simons, said he betrayed her. Because he had assured her the carbon tax was going to make people better off, but he had later admitted that people heating with oil were made far worse off by his carbon tax, thus needing a pause from that tax. And Liberal Senator Percy Down wrote a spectacular piece just yesterday where he said the opportunity for the Conservative leader to form government was created by a lack of fiscal responsibility in the Liberal government. And the damage it caused our economy is now showing up in the opinion polls. Within the Liberal Party, many members who are in favor of fiscal responsibility have given up on this current iteration of the Liberal Party. He goes on. Originally, the centralist Liberals assumed that the Prime Minister and his crowd needed to be educated on the economic issues of the day. That naivete was replaced with the realization that they were not a serious government when it came to the economy, that they simply didn't care and would throw money at anything that crossed their mind. The resulting interest rate hikes, increasing cost of living, and huge debt didn't seem to concern them. This Liberal senator goes on to say the Prime Minister should be fired and replaced with a new Liberal leader. Meanwhile, the incoming Liberal leader, Mark Carney, is now firing shots at the Prime Minister, claiming that he would not have allowed two classes of Canadian citizens on the carbon tax question. This is carbon tax chaos. Canadians are paying the price, and all of it proves that this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. He is not worth the cost of heat. He is not worth the cost of food. He is not worth the cost of housing. But apparently, he is worth the cost to the NDP. They were elected by good, solid, decent, working-class folks in places like Vancouver Island, the Skeena and the Bulkley Valley, in Timmins. Good people. I've met these people. Folks who pack their lunch, get out of bed every morning, work hard, and build our country. But they are betrayed by the NDP, who now work for the Prime Minister, who've sold out the working class rural people of this country who were the foundation of that party. Shameful. And now they have a decision. The NDP leader says he disagrees with a dual class citizenship approach of the Prime Minister on the carbon tax. I'm giving him a chance to prove it. We have a motion before the House that simply says, let's give everyone the same tax-free heat this winter. The NDP leader has already stated that he agrees with that point of view, but he has to check with his boss, the leader of the Liberal Party, the Prime Minister of Canada. Well, everyday people in Timmins, in Kapuskasing, in Smithers, British Columbia, and in countless other NDP communities will be watching on Monday to find out whether the NDP leader votes for them or the Prime Minister. And if he doesn't vote for the people he represents, why should they vote for him in the next election? The good news is that Conservatives do not work for this Prime Minister. We work for the common people. The common sense of the common people united for our common home. Your home, my home, our home. Let's bring it home.
Question.